this week's episode of the Founder and the Force Multiplier podcast, where we explore how founders and leaders work together with their right-hand partners to turn ideas into action and build wildly successful businesses. Today, I am speaking with Nick Ginsburg. Nick is a professional keynote speaker sharing his knowledge and life lessons with audiences worldwide. He is also the host of The Open Drive, a podcast that focuses on Nick's childhood and how he managed to break the cycle of addiction and mental health struggles set by his parents to create the life he wanted. When he isn't on a stage speaking, he is the executive assistant to the Provost and senior vice president of Monash University and is a passionate advocate for the administrative profession. Nick is the founder of the Admin Collective, a community for administrative professionals worldwide. With a focus on shared learning, members meet, share, and learn together in a confidential and judgment-free community. Underpinning all of his work is a desire to increase mental well-being through shared stories, safe communities, and increased time to focus on self-care. He is extremely passionate about mental health and is currently completing his Bachelor of Psychology. Nick is such a pleasure to speak with. I really appreciated his vulnerability and transparency during our conversation. That's how people can really connect and learn from each other. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I think you will, then be sure to let us know in all the usual places, such as leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this episode. Hello, Nick, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. I remember we talked, I think it was a couple months ago, and I just really enjoyed our conversation, and I still had so many questions for you. So I was like, I had to make this happen so I could really dig into some of your experience. And I have some questions about the sale of the company that you founded. So I'm ready to dive in if you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
So in addition to being in administrative and executive support roles for almost 12 years at Monash University, you're currently serving as the EA to the Provost and senior vice president. You're also a keynote speaker. You're a podcast host. You're the founder of the Admin Collective. And I believe you're currently getting your degree in psychology. So first of all, how do you balance all of those various responsibilities and opportunities? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
Okay. So that is probably the number one question I get asked is how I juggle it. And really it comes down to passion and time management. So all of those things are stuff that I'm really passionate about. I really love my day job. I love being an executive assistant. I love the sort of problem solving and customer focused aspect of it. I love building relationships and I love helping people, which is a really big common thread through all the things that I'm doing. And so it's really down to that. So I'm so passionate about all of them that while, yeah, it's a lot of work and I have very little social life, it's something that I'm super, super, super passionate about continuing doing. And I'm good at time management. So I'm good at really planning out what my week, month, semester looks like and doing it sort of like that, really. And it's worked really well. So I've been juggling those for a few years now and I'm in a really good rhythm.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned that you don't really have a lot of social time or maybe social needs, but I'm actually curious, does that bother you or do you get your social fix in other ways? Or are you an introvert?
I joke about that. I still get to have nice weekends and spend time with my husband and all of that fun stuff. But I do have to really plan things out in advance. I'm probably an extroverted introvert. So I quite like being at home. I quite like my own space, but I'm able to be extroverted relatively easily is how I am. But yeah, I try and get some social life. I'm quite big on self-care and making sure that sort of my mental well-being and mental health is looked after. And so I really factor that into my planning as well, because otherwise I'm just going to burn out and then I'm no good to anyone.
Yeah. Have you experienced burnout before in your career?
Not catastrophically. So I've definitely reached periods where, and I didn't know it at the time, and I think that that's a really common thing. So on reflection, I look back and I think, oof, I think I was probably a lot closer to burnout than what I thought I was. And there was a time a few years ago where it was pre-COVID, and there was a lot happening in my personal life, a lot happening at work. And I really I think I just ran on adrenaline for about
Yeah.
6 months, and then got to sort of a few months after everything had settled, and realized, I think that was cutting it a bit too close.
What were some of the things that you looked back on and said, "Oh, that felt like I was getting close to burnout," or like what should other people look for so that they can keep an eye out for for burnout, so that it doesn't happen?
Yeah. So for me, it was mood. I was very snappy, which I'm not generally.
Right.
Uh, I was also quite emotional, which I am, but even more so. And also, things like I was exhausted all the time.
Mm.
I had also not a great memory. So my
Oh, that's
cognitive load
interesting.
was obviously just running at max the
Yes.
entire time. And so my short-term memory was pretty wobbly. And even now, like looking back on that period, there are big chunks that I don't have clear memories of. But the reality is with burnout, it's and I heard someone else speak about this, and I've forgotten who it was, but it's almost like that, the analogy of putting, what is it, a crab into like cold water and then boiling it up slowly. Like you just don't know that it's happening
Right.
until you're kind of at a point. And so keeping yourself front of mind
Mm.
constantly is the way to kind of counter that. And that's
Mhm.
what's happened to me. So since that period where I reflected and realized that that's how close I was, I, I really make sure that I know my limits. I know how much I'm willing to give to various aspects of my life, and I don't give more. I'm quite comfortable at saying no.
No. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The piece that you mentioned, the like the short-term memory piece or like
Mm.
not being able to remember certain like chunks of time, just you saying that reminded actually did remind me of when I was in that burnout phase. I too did not know I was in it until, hindsight is 2020. And that is probably one of the classic sign for me too that I was making mistakes, I was forgetting things, and I'm like, this is just not how I typically operate, and that should have been a sign, but now I know and can
Yeah.
pay attention to it. And so I was curious why psychology and why study that now?
Yeah, great question. I love when I get to talk about this. So, psychology is something I've always been really passionate in. It is how our mind works and how people perceive and react to situations is super fascinating to me.
Mhm.
And so, I've always had a passion for it. It's always been something that I was front of mind. But the reality was, I never thought that I was smart enough to do it. And I grew up, and I talk about this. I've got a podcast where I don't talk about admin stuff at all. It is all about my childhood. I grew up with parents that struggled really badly with mental health issues and also addiction. And so I talk through that whole process. But
Mhm.
so there's a couple of sort of points that led me to this. So one, it was always a passion. Two, I watched the lack of support that my parents received for their mental
Mhm.
health issues. Particularly in most countries around the world, the mental health systems are not adequate at all. And so I want to try and help people in that space. And that's something that's really big for me.
Mm.
But yeah, I'd sat on it for ages, and I had lots of people telling me, oh, you should be a counselor, you should be a therapist, you should do something in that space.
Mm.
And literally I was like, yeah, 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 yeah. But I honestly did not think that I was smart enough.
Mm.
And so I lost both of my parents. So I lost my mum in 2021, and then my other mum, Louise, in 2022. But when I lost my mum in 21, I went, what am I doing? I'm just going to go for it. Like, what's the worst?
Right,
I do a
right.
semester of uni, I fail, I pull out, no big deal, right?
Yep.
I'll be fine. And so I enrolled at the end of 2021, and in hindsight, I probably should have waited, because at that point I knew that Louise had terminal breast cancer and she was getting towards the end. And
Mm.
so stress period. And so I probably should have held off. But I started my degree beginning of last year and I have loved every second of it. And turns out I am smart enough. So, and I think it's and the reason why I'm open about talking about the smart enough aspect is
Yeah.
a lot of people, I think that about themselves
Mhm.
and don't say it. I literally thought that I would fail every subject, and I haven't. I've performed way better than what I thought I
Yeah.
would. And I'm retaining the information and I love it. And I think passion plays a big part in that.
Yeah, and you're just it sounds like you're just super interested in and curious about it and
Sure.
really just wanna continue to, learn, which is
Mm,
so cool. Do you think maybe it's too soon to tell, but do you think you
yeah.
may switch
Yeah.
career paths? Oh, okay, that's the
Yeah.
plan. Okay.
Yeah. And look, it's such a long road. I'm
Yeah,
probably five years away before that even gets close to a reality. And it's
got it.
so in Australia, to the pathway to becoming a psychologist is you do your undergraduate, then you do a year of honors, and then
Okay.
there's a few different pathways, but the one I'll do is a year of honors, and then there's a 2-year master's degree,
Mm.
and then you can start practicing. So I'm miles away. Like I'm probably 86 years away from doing
Yeah.
it, but it's
Well, it's a good thing
but
that you love it then.
yeah, exactly. But it is definitely the more I get into it, the more I can see myself in that space
Yeah.
and working as a clinical psychologist. That's kind of where I'm working at the moment. Obviously, I've still got a while in my degree, so that could change at any point. But the desire at the moment is to end up being a psychologist. And
So cool.
yeah, I
Yeah.
can't wait.
I love it. I love that. So when we were talking through all of these different areas of your life that you have, all together, do you consider them like side hustles? Do you consider them passion projects? How do you something else? Like how do you categorize all the work that you're doing?
It's really that's a really great question because I see them as one.
Mm,
Except for actually, maybe not as one whole, but there is my work at Monash, so my day job, which I get to do a ton of the stuff in that I love that I also do outside of work.
mhm.
But everything that I do outside of work, I see as one. So they're all common thread throughout those are so strong to me, but it's hard for other people to see that.
Right.
So for me, everything that I do is about improving mental well-being. And you do that by creating safe communities like the Admin Collective. You speak vulnerably about your own experiences, which is my podcast and my
Mm,
keynote speaking. Like this is all of it has such a strong link to me and it is as one. Whereas I think externally it's harder to see that. But even that, so improving mental well-being sits within my role at Monash as well. So I run our EA network internally, and we've got
oh, nice.
300 people in that.
Wow.
And yeah, we don't have 300 titled EAs. We
Yeah.
have the ruling, which is so silly. It's not a rule; it's just a general social kind of norm. But anyone that is working in the administrative profession that is supporting a leader of something at the
Mm,
university.
gotcha.
So there's about 300 of us,
Yes.
and a lot of the stuff I do in that is focused on mental well-being and
Mm,
self-care and authenticity and making sure that people are putting themselves front of mind. And recently I organized a masterclass session with Rachel Benetti from Australia, who is
mm,
phenomenal. If you
mhm.
don't know her, she is a true superstar. Like I cannot sing her praises enough.
Yes. I've
Uh,
been, following her content quite
oh,
a bit lately, and I'm like, I gotta meet her.
you have to. She is one of those people that I just watch in awe. Like,
Yeah.
so we ran our first ever EA summit at Monash at the beginning of this year, and she was our keynote speaker for that.
Oh,
And
great.
just the feedback was insane from the audience. Like, we did and she won't mind me saying this because it's very positive, but we did obviously feedback and she got like a 9.4 or something out of 10, like
That's
wild,
amazing.
like
Yeah.
totally wild. Like she's so incredible. But we invited her back to
Oh,
do a self-care masterclass. So to really focus on stress management and looking after yourself. And
mm,
I was like, look, everyone, We've got 55 places. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Mm.
We sold out in 2 days.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. So she's phenomenal, but also that's the kind of stuff that I also do at work. So while it can look disjointed in terms of my career, everything is really rooted in, which is essentially my brand and my
Right.
kind of authenticity around self-care and mental well-being and authenticity and all of that.
Yeah, I heard Gary Vaynerchuk in a video not too long ago talk about the whole concept of like finding your niche and your brand, and what really stood out to me that he said was that you are the niche and like the person is. And I'm like, that's so true, because even just looking at the things that you do, yes, there's a common thread, but at the end of the day, the common thread is you and
Correct.
where you decide to spend your time and engage and connect and build communities. And so I love that.
And just on that, sorry to jump in, but
Glad.
I think that's a really important thing to kind of hone in on, because I think when people start a business or anything that's kind of out on their own as them as the front runner, right?
Yeah.
People will often think about competition and who else is battling for your lane, right?
Yes.
It's so silly, right? It's just, I mean, obviously, when you get to larger companies, yes, you need to be aware of your competition, who's out there and all of that.
Sure.
I'm not silly. But when it comes to like stuff that I do, there isn't any competition, because even if someone is talking about something similar, so like Rachel and I, for example, will touch on similar topics, but her and I are very different people. We offer very different things, but we still kind of overlap. There is
Right.
no competition. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really important point to make, because people focus so much on what others are doing and you forget that you need to just focus on you.
Right.
So
Right.
the only person that your plan and your career needs to make sense to is you.
Totally
That's
agree.
it.
Yeah, it stops so many people from taking that first step, or well, really the first step, and trying something or putting themselves out there. I mean, I know I've been guilty of it in the past. Like, the market is so saturated, we don't need someone else talking about the executive assistant role. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna just try it anyway and see what happens.
Exactly.
So I did have, I had a lot of questions about the admin collective and the sale, because
Yeah.
I thought that was super exciting, interesting, and just that I don't see it very often when somebody building this brand. And then, sometimes I see collaborations or partnerships, but you actually sold it from my understanding. I would love to hear all about that process and, what prompted you to make the sale. I just, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. And I think, I think you're right. I don't think this happens much. And when it does, it's not spoken about.
Right.
And I think it's important to talk about it. So when I started the Admin Collective, the desire that I had was to create a space that was judgment-free and really safe for admin professionals, right? I wanted it to feel like a group where you could learn and share together without any fear of judgment, right? And I built it. When we got to the point of selling, we had 60 odd members from around the world. So we had members in the US, in Canada, the UK, New Zealand, Australia. I think there was one in South Africa. Like, we built it to a point where, or I'd built it to a point where it was global. We had great people in it, really incredible engagement and authenticity in our monthly meetings. But I also knew that there is only so much that I can do. So my time is limited. I'm a one-man show. I'm not one of the charmed ones. I can't freeze time and do work on other things. And so towards the end of last year and particularly beginning of this year, I thought, you know what? This has gotten as big as I can take it. So I've gotten it to a certain point, but someone else with better resources and more time can take it further. And so that was really the start of my thought around it. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, who would I trust to take that on? Because this was such a personal thing for me.
Right.
Also, I'm aware that members mostly signed up because of, and this goes for any community, the person that's in charge of it. And so I had to really think through, well, what does that look like? Who would take that on? Who has the ability to take it on, make it better, grow it, and also keep the values the same? Because that was the important aspect of selling it for me. Sure, there was monetary side of things, but the number one thing for me was that the members still continued to get the same value and that the community had the same values was really important. And so I shortlisted a few people that I thought could possibly do it. And then the number one on my list was Candice Burnigam, who is just a hoot and so much fun. And she runs a company in Australia called Admin Avenues. She does a lot of work for our community worldwide, not just in Australia. She's had a stellar EA career, like just super impressive. She knows her stuff. And more importantly, her and I share a similar set of values. And so I had her as number one. And I've made no secret of that. I said it from the kind of the moment we publicly announced it. But we jumped on a call probably March or April, and she was talking to me about her side of things in the business and all of that. And then at the end of this conversation, she said, one of the things I've been told to do is to start an admin community, but I don't want to be in competition with you. And I went, well, that's funny because this is what I've been thinking. And I talked her through this thought process, and then we went away and we worked out all the nuts and bolts and made sure that the values stayed the same and that the community still felt appreciated and loved and received at base the same value for what they were putting in. And then on the 1st of July, we did the official switch over and announcement, which I was terrified. I had to film a video, and I don't get like now. I mean, 3 years ago, maybe yes, I terrified at most things, but like now when it comes to this thing, I don't get terrified. And so recording the video to the members, we did a special video just to members a few days before it was announced. It took me, I reckon, probably maybe 5 times of recording it.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I was so emotional. But not emotional like I'm sad, I'm letting go, or it wasn't anything like that. It was there was a mixture of I'm so proud of myself that I got it to this point and it's now being taken on by someone else. There was that. But it was also like, this is the end of that chapter for me. And that is a thing you need to process. And so it took me a few goes. And even in the video that we ended up sending to members, I watched it just recently because I'm a glutton for making myself sad. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, you can tell I was just full of emotion. Like my voice was like shaky. I was bright. So when I have this beautiful thing, like a mood face. So if I have any type of emotion, I go like purple or like bright red. It's just happens. And so I was bright red. And I remember working on the computer trying to like reduce the redness of the video. It's so crazy. So that process was so brilliant, and Candice and her team just did such an incredible job.
That's so cool.
And even now, so they've now been operating since the 1st of July. I will always be the founder. I'm still a member. I'm still heavily involved as a member. So I'm in the chat and I'm on the calls, and I'm obviously not leading. I'm making sure that Candice and her team have their space, but I'm still in it. And they have done an incredible job. They shifted the platform over to something that is just so phenomenal. There's so many resources, and they have these almost weekly masterclasses with special guests and monthly guests where we do big conversations. I'm so proud of where it's at. It's almost like in Mean Girls, the stage mum, when she's like got the video camera recording. That's me, right? Doing the dance moves. as she's recording. That is
Yeah.
that's me watching the admin collective continue to grow and
So
soar.
cool.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions like on the kind of the business side
Yeah.
of it. When you originally started the admin collective, did you have intentions to sell, or did that kind of come later as you were building it?
I knew it. I this is a trickier question. So I think I knew that at some point it would be too much. Like I wouldn't be able to take it to where I think members deserve it to take it.
Mhm.
But it was never a solid plan. And keep in mind, I started it at the end of 2020 and then lost my mum in the middle of 2021 and then lost
Mm.
my other mum in the middle of 2022.
Oh,
And so it was, whilst it was running and we were building it, there
yeah.
was so much else happening that really it was me making sure that people felt loved and connected while also making sure that I'm keeping
That
myself
you
healthy and
Yes.
and looking after myself. And so there there really wasn't an intentional thought process around it until sort of towards the end of last year,
Mm.
beginning of this year is when it really sort of solidified in my head. But I think I always knew that it would get to a point where someone else would have to take it on, or we'd have to
Mm.
bring someone else in as a partner, or um, get some sort of funding or backing or something to enable me to do more with it. But then sort of as life evolves, I was like, no, I think the baby needs to be handed over to give the best shot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Did you sell 100%, or do you still have an equity stake?
So my thought around that, so I didn't want to have an equity because I didn't want to still be meddling in it. So I wanted to give it the best opportunity to fly on its own
Mhm.
with Candice and her team, because I felt that if, say, for example, I sold 60% of it and I kept 40, whilst I'm a minority and I'm like, there's obviously that constant income generating and all of that. Money isn't the most important thing to me, so I tend not to lead with that in my decisions.
Got
Yeah, and so I knew that if I still had a stake in it, I'm really strong-willed and opinionated, and so I knew that I would be more inclined to say, I think this is what we should be doing, and I think this is the direction
Mhm.
we should be heading.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to do that. I wanted really to give them the chance to run it how they want.
Yeah.
And how it's worked is actually very different. So Candice still comes to me and talks me through stuff that she's thinking and in terms of the admin collective, and wants to make sure that I'm supportive. And that's really incredible and not something that she needed to do.
Mm.
I trust her fully and I trust her judgment. And so where in the end, I wanted to give her the chance to do it herself.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think the whole process is really interesting. I think it's also just a testament to your ability to create, and a great reminder to other people listening to this podcast that, it was about 3 years, right? 3 years that
Mhm.
you built this, and that you
Yeah.
built whether you intended to or not, you ended up building a sellable asset,
Yeah.
which is really incredible. And I mean, just for personally, really encouraging to know that that's, a possibility, that there's a path forward for that. It's very cool. Thank you for sharing.
No worries. And I think just on that, I think a lot of people create these things that they're the head of, right? So
Mm.
if we look at any type of community, any business where you are the face, and they think that it has to stay with you until it dies. So it either is an incredible, huge success, or it'll just like sort of flatline with
Mhm.
you for years until it eventually folds, right? And I just don't think that's the case. I think and this probably sounds a bit harsher than I intended, but I think that's quite a selfish way of looking at
Mm.
a business. So for me, if you can see it and think, well, I think someone else can take this further than me, because me
Amazing.
selling it doesn't remove me from the picture. It
Mhm.
doesn't remove me from the history. It doesn't negate what I have done. In fact, it adds to it.
You're
And
right.
I think a lot of people are scared of that
Mhm.
section of it. And I just don't think that there's a need to be scared of it. And funnily enough, and I'm sure Candice will be happy with me saying this, but she kept saying to me leading up to it, and then the first sort of month after, now you're going to have regret decisions. You're going to feel like you've made a big mistake. You'll probably cry about losing it, and that's all normal. It's all normal. And yes, of course, it's all normal. But I didn't. I never once regretted it. I never thought, what have I done? I never cried about it not being mine. Like that never happened. I was emotional, but predominantly because I was so proud of myself. Like I'm a boy that was raised in like government housing in Australia that had nothing. Like I used to eat cereal for dinner, looked after myself. So the fact that I was able to start a business and get it to a point of being able to sell a business is like, was never on my bingo card, right? It was never even a possibility. So the emotion surrounding this was more proud of myself for the growth and where I've gotten to as opposed to regret.
Yeah. It's amazing. I would like to shift a little bit and talk about some of the EA role because you've obviously been in it for a long time and you understand that community very well.
Yeah.
So when you think back to the beginning of your EA executive support career, what is one thing that you wish you had known when you started?
Oh my God, this is such a good question. So there's a few things, but the number one thing I think is really critically important to know when you're starting out is there is no perfect mold of what the right assistant looks like. So, and I'll dive into that a bit more. When people start at my company, so we are very large, we're Australia's largest university, people look at the senior EAs at the company and go, oh, I must fit into that mold. And it's so far from the truth. Being an EA is it's so based on individual skill and personality and fit. Obviously, there's a whole ton of skill set that we need, and it's a common thread throughout everything. But when you get down to it, you win and lose jobs based on your fit and how you're going to connect with people, right? And that is that is such an individual game. And so if you are constantly molding yourself on someone that you deem to be successful and you say, well, that is what I have to be, and I have to answer emails that way, and I have to make sure I interact with people that way, be it positive or negative, you are going to be completely burnt out trying to be someone that you're not.
Yes.
And I think that is critically important. And I don't think people talk about it enough.
No, and I was just going to add that, and that you end up trying to solve problems that don't actually need to be solved because they're not problems for either your executive team or for your executive, which is what I see a lot because they're like, well, this is the way to do it. And I'm like, well, not necessarily. What does your team think? Is that how they like to do things? That it is very individualized.
And just on that, I think that's such a good point. There are these set ways that people like to work. And I think being adaptable as an assistant is so critically important. So as EA to the Provost, I've now gone through, and just because of movement at the very top of our tree, I've gone through 3 executives. I've currently got an acting one at the minute, and all 3 of them are totally different. All 3 of them have different ways of working, have different preferences, have different requirements around what they expect from their team in meetings. And so if each time that changed in the last 5 years, I had a set rule book that I refused to bend on, I would be exhausted. I'd just be constantly fighting this battle that I put in place.
Yes, exactly.
So by being adaptable and sort of saying, hey, how do you like to work? How are we going to get the best out of this environment? What works for you? And then you go, yeah, I can make that work.
Or if they don't know, then I feel like that's a great time to come in with some suggestions or, well, this is what I used to do. But you're right. You have to be so adaptable and flexible.
Yeah.
Have you ever had the wrong fit with an executive? And did you work through it? Did you move on to a different opportunity? How did that materialize?
Yeah, they ended up leaving. So
Okay.
so whilst I've experienced it, I I haven't had to manage the end aspect of it.
Mm.
So I ended up with someone not by choice. So there was some shuffling of roles. This was
Mhm.
years ago, shuffling of roles, and I ended up supporting someone who just wasn't the right fit for me. And they're not a bad person. They're not bad at their job. It just wasn't the right. We were not the right partnership.
Yeah.
And so that was really challenging. So I worked in that space for about 6 months, and then they ended up shifting out of that role.
Mhm.
And I was getting to a point where I thought, you know what, this isn't worth it. I
Mm.
need to step out. And it wasn't sort of a toxic environment or anything like that, but it just didn't feel right. And I'm the type of person, I think we all are, but we put varying degrees of sort of importance on it. I need to be happy. I need to go into work excited and
Mhm.
feeling like I'm making a difference. And I didn't feel that in that role. And so I was ready to step out entirely. I was
Mm.
ready to go. And I talk about this a lot when I chat with other assistants, that if you're in a environment that isn't making you happy, and you've done everything that you can to try and sort of shift it,
Yeah.
and keeping in mind, when I say that, the responsibility isn't on you um, solely
Solely.
across the entire situation, but if you've done everything that is in your power to try and change it, and you're still having a horrible time, it's time to go.
I completely agree with you on that. Is there like a time frame that is it a time frame thing? Like I'm going to try for X number of months, and if it still doesn't work, or how do you know when you really have given it enough?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree on the time frame thing, because everybody has a different sort of level of reserves of happiness and what can get you through a
Yes.
period like that. So for me, I was probably a month or two away from really pulling the pin,
Yeah.
whereas others, it could have been weeks,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, right. True.
or years,
Yes.
right? There isn't a. I don't think there is a hard fast rule. I think self-awareness is a really, really important skill to have.
Mhm.
People talk a lot about emotional intelligence and how critical it is. And yes, it is critical, and I fully agree and I fully back it, but it's very much a buzzword. I was sort of saying at the minute. I do think not just assistants, I think every single person on this planet needs to work on their self-awareness.
Yes.
So if you have good self-awareness and you can understand and read your own emotional state, that is the cue to when you need to exit.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to know when you need to step out. The struggle is, if you don't have that self-awareness,
Mhm.
you end up in quite a you can end up in quite a bad place, which isn't healthy or happy.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that you've had a couple of different executives over maybe the 5 years, I believe you said. So, what is your recommendation that an EA or a chief of staff should do within that, first 30 days when they are
Mm,
working with a new executive, whether you're the incumbent or whether the executive is an incumbent, but either way, it's a new relationship?
yeah, there's a few things. So setting boundaries is really important. So the first conversation or so needs to talk about boundaries. And when I say talk about boundaries, I don't necessarily mean you go in and say, well, this is what I'm willing to do, and this is what I'm not willing to do, and this blah blah blah. It's this is how I like to work.
Mhm.
This is how you get the most out of me, right? This is how I can help you get the most out of yourself in the role.
Mhm.
Okay. That's what I mean by boundaries conversation. And I think
Yes.
that's a professional way of having a boundaries conversation.
Yes.
So that's the number one. Uh, the other thing that I think is critically important is understanding how they like to work. What are their gripes? So what are the things that make them instantly go, I'm not having a bar of that. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be, and
Yeah.
we all have those topics that if someone tries to press us on it, we're going to just go brick wall up. I'm
Mhm.
not having a bar of this. I don't want to deal with it. Right. So what is that for them? And then also understanding how they want to work within a team environment is also critically important, and how you like to work in a team environment is also important. And then the final thing, which I think goes sort of missed a lot of the time when these conversations are had, is watching.
Mm.
So I watch. I'm currently actually, we're over 30 days now. It's about 5 weeks into the new relationship
Oh,
with
okay.
my current executive, and her and I are working really well together. She's great. I'm very lucky, but I watch everything.
Mm.
I'm watching how she interacts with people. I'm watching her scent items. I'm watching how her life outside of work sort of factors in. How does that impact what's she like when she gets to work? There is
Mhm.
so much, and it sounds weird. I get it. I'm not a creator, but like there's so much
No, it's
watching.
so true. It's so valuable.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do this, but maybe don't articulate it. So
Mhm.
really understanding and paying attention, and like a prime example for me is watching how my new executive interacts with people that she meets with.
Mhm.
So what are her expectations in that corridor, right? So when someone's walking up to her room, what is she expecting? Does she kick straight into a business discussion, or is she having a personal chat first?
Mhm.
Because that then dictates to me how much time I need to block out for meetings.
Yes.
So there's so many layers in that I think are really important, that sometimes people forget, because you just go, oh my God, everything's happening at once. I've just got to stay afloat. But
Yeah.
stop, breathe, and watch.
Yeah. You answered, I think, most of my question about the whole watching thing. I mean, you're not just watching to observe. You're not just observing to observe. You're observing for a very specific reason, to take that information and then translate it. You gave the example of the time management piece.
Mhm.
When you're looking at just the way she interacts, or any executive interacts in terms of their relationship, like what are you doing with that information? How are you, like, what's the benefit for you doing all of this observation?
Huge. The benefit is enormous. So watching how she interacts enables me to talk on her behalf with authority. So I am watching what she's saying, how she's saying it, what her thoughts are on various issues,
Mm.
because that builds the picture for me as to what I can answer on her behalf without having to bother her. I mean, that's one aspect. The scent items, I mean, there is so much in a scent box, a scent items. There is so much in there.
Mhm.
And this is, I think some of the things that I hear on the ground is around people being concerned about writing on behalf of their executive,
Mhm.
and how do you find the tone, and how do you make sure you get the messaging right, and all of that stuff. It is all in the scent items.
I so
So
agree.
it's all there.
Yeah.
So in her sent items, I can see her personal emails to a family friend, and how she
Mhm.
writes those in comparison to how she writes maybe a more sternly worded email because someone's
Mhm.
done something wrong, to an email to the team. And I'm able to then use those as a guide to be able to draft communication for her, and sort of not handle, but like give our team also the right sort of level of tone for
Mhm.
different communication. So our communications manager, I'm able to provide to him, hey, this is where this should sit,
Yeah. Yeah,
because
I
I
love that.
understand that from watching. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such good stuff. I love that you mentioned the scent. That's a big thing that I like to look at too. And I think maybe sometimes that can be missed when when everyone is getting in the inbox. They just think I'm just going to go through the inbox, not necessarily what's being sent out. What are you seeing right now for trends in the executive assistant role?
Oh. I always find this such a big question that I'm not sure I can ever answer well, because I think it's really country specific.
Mm.
So I think when you look at America, even versus Canada versus the UK versus here, they're all quite different. the thing that I will say around trends and our profession is that there are more people speaking up about their experiences. So
Yeah.
sharing their knowledge, which I'm a huge fan of. And what that enables is that it enables people to actually see a more nuanced view of our profession, that we are all very different and that we think of things very differently. And so that I think has been a big shifter in the last few years. So COVID really helped that, people to step out of their box because they felt comfortable doing it from your own home.
Yeah.
And so that has changed, I think, our profession. But in terms of real trends, I think that it is super country specific and probably not something that I can articulate well, just because I think it's a really, like the answer to that would have to be very nuanced. So I think, in short, to answer, that sharing knowledge and the people that are willing to speak up has heavily influenced what people are going for, what roles, what skills they view as important, also what kind of assistant they want to be, and understanding that they can actually do it from a place of authenticity without it being deemed as unprofessional. So I think that has really shifted in the community.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I am curious, maybe in the admin collective or even just from the, various people that you're talking to, is there a common question that keeps coming up?
Oh gosh, always. So there's questions around the role and the future of the role. I think that people, and this has been a question that has been around for years already.
Yeah.
Like this whole question of how to use Chat GPT, and are we going to lose our roles, and are we going to lose the vast majority of our role? I think that's a really big question at the moment. I have my own views, as you will have your own views, and I think every person you ask will give you a different answer. But in short, that question around, are we going to lose our jobs? Are our jobs going to be replaced by AI? The answer is no. There will be tasks that will be taken away, but the emotional intelligence aspect of our role, so being able to read a situation, being able to read a mood, understand a vast range of emotions, AI can't do that, at least not yet.
Not yet.
And I don't think it ever will.
Yeah.
I think there will be an attempt for it to do some of that.
Right.
Yeah, but I think we're a fair way away from it being able to do it accurately.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that we are in any threat of losing our jobs. But in saying that, I think if you're in the admin profession and you're not keeping up to date with technology and skills, you are doing yourself an enormous disservice.
I agree.
If you've been with your executive for 10 years, for example, at the same company, and you go, well, I'm very happy, I'm very comfortable, I don't want another job, I don't need to focus on all of this stuff. Your executive could leave at any minute. And then you are then thrown into this pool of new experience and potentially having to find a new job, and you're going up against assistants who do know how to effectively use AI within their roles.
Yeah.
And if you've got, and that you have to keep yourself up to date. And there are so many incredible people that in our community, and I'm not one of them, that are talking about this in really great detail.
Me neither, but yes, I know that. I know other people.
Yeah. So one that I can recommend, tech savvy assistant Jess, phenomenal.
Yeah.
She's American but based in Canada, and she's also neurodivergent, which also enables a really unique perspective on the learning, and something I think is incredible that we've got that. She does phenomenal work in this space, and how assistants can integrate AI into their work. She's running a course. It's coming up. I'm not sure when this will go live. It may be past, but it's in a few weeks, I think, or a month or something. But she's always running sessions for people. If you see something online, even just a foundations of AI course, jump on, figure out what it is. Because what we don't realize as assistants, AI is everywhere. If you utilize the shortcuts app on your iPhone, that's AI.
Yeah.
Like I have an automation turned on my phone because for parking at work, I don't need to be paying parking fines. I can tell you that. As soon as I drive onto campus, my iPhone does a pop-up saying, "Run this command." I click it, and my parking's set up.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
we do use it so much more than we think we might
yes,
in our everyday. And it's just, I guess in my opinion, it's just taking a lot of the, the tasks and
right.
projects that we already do and layering on
Mhm.
an AI or a tech component if we don't already. It's not a tech enabled, it's not an assistant who's it. I'm trying to make sure I'm saying it right. It's a tech enabled assistant,
Yes.
not an assistant enabled. I'm probably getting that wrong, but you know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah,
Like, we
yeah,
want
yeah.
these great EAs who are elevated through the technology.
Exactly. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Also, think of it as the AI stuff will take some of the more mundane tasks away from you,
Mhm.
enables you to be more strategic. And everybody talks about being strategic as an assistant, and I
You
think
know.
you and I could probably talk about this in depth around common myths and all of that. But by removing those tasks, it just frees you up to look at your role and
Mhm.
what you can give to the company in
Mhm.
a far more strategic way.
Yes.
And I'm always looking for stuff in my role to enable me to stop doing a manual task. Like
Mhm.
I'm all about efficiency. If I don't have to do it, I'm not doing it. Like it's
Yes.
in all seriousness, like if there is a step in the process that I think is redundant, I'm telling someone.
Mm.
And so that's what AI does. It removes those redundant aspects of a process. It
Mhm.
doesn't remove it, it just transfers it to them, but
Sure.
it enables you to do so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Do you use Chat GPT?
I do. I actually use the mobile app.
Uh,
So yeah, if you don't have it, download the app because it's I use it far more because I just pick up my phone and quickly ask the question.
yes.
Uh, I don't use it as much as Jess does, and for all the things that she does in it. And I
Mm.
probably need to take her course, to be fair, because I do want to figure out more about how I can work with it.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
using it at probably a very basic level right
yeah,
now. I'm sure there's a
you'd be
lot
the
more I can do. Yeah.
yeah, you and I are the same. So I'm asking it lots of questions, and I use it also a lot for idea generation. So
Mhm.
for me, I have always a set of things that I love to sort of talk about, and I've got a great idea, but you will know as well. But when you're constantly posting online, you go, is there a different way that I can be saying this? Or
Mhm.
what is another way of talking about this topic? And I'll put stuff into Chat GPT, and there'll be some times where it's like, oh no, that's way out. I'm not doing anything to do with that.
Yeah.
But then there are other times I'll be like, oh, I really like this point. I might
Mhm.
actually pull this out and talk about it more in my caption or in a video or whatnot. So idea generation is phenomenal in
Yeah.
that. And it also can create documents for you. This is the
Mhm.
thing I don't think people understand. It can create agendas. It can create rough travel itineraries. And the opportunities are
It's
like
yeah,
huge.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah, I have a lot more exploration to do, but I'm definitely gonna check out it's Jessica, right? Jessica
Yes.
Stuff
Jessica
will
Mipra.
post link. Yeah.
If you just search tech savvy assistant, it's her. She's literally, I kid you not, she's the queen of
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah. I've definitely seen her stuff all over the place. So I'm
Yeah.
probably taking classes at some point. It's time to dive back in.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to touch on, kind of a common thread of some of our conversation, and certainly a lot of the work that you do, which is around mental health and well being. I know that you are really passionate about that, and it shows up in a lot of your work and in life. So, what do you think are some of the current biggest challenges around mental health and well being? And what can we do to help make progress in the right direction for ourselves and for others?
Oh wow, that's a very big question. I'll talk about it more from a high level point of view. So I'll talk about a high level thing, and then I'll talk about stuff that we can do within our lives. we need to be lobbying for better mental health support. So there needs to be more services. There needs to be less stigma around seeking help. So I don't think this would come as a shock to anyone, but men are far less likely to seek any type of support for mental health issues, or actually any medical issues, so physical or mental, which is why men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide. And that is a statistic that to me is so sad, because society has taught them that they can't speak up, that them expressing emotions is a bad thing, and that it deems them as weak. And so what we can do as a society, and this goes for everyone, not just men, but breaking that stigma around mental health. I talk about seeing a psychologist. I have a psychologist. I go to him monthly, and it is 100% one of the best things I've ever done for myself. To be able to talk to someone that is removed from your life about things that are happening with you is a huge help.
Okay.
So we need to be able to support people to go and seek help. So if you are comfortable sharing your mental health journey with someone that you think may be struggling, share it. Even talk about it in a very conversational way. Just add something into the conversation, like, I at my psychologist the other week, they mentioned this.
Right? Yeah.
You don't have to say, I can see you're struggling, I think you should go see someone. You find ways of mixing that in with the conversation. Also, so that just helps remove the stigma, and I think that's critically important. The other thing is really for us as a community to look out for one another. So understanding that, so there's a couple of things. So perfect mental health doesn't exist. You're never going to be perfect as with mental health. I sometimes struggle with anxiety. It's not something that happens all the time, but it pops up every now and again. And when it does, it's not a fun experience, as those that also do that will attest to. But there are days where we are just not mentally as strong as others. And so giving people the space and the time to feel supported and loved throughout those periods is so important.
Yeah.
And then separate to all of that, you have to put your own mask on first, right? So that's kind of the big picture stuff, but you need to put yourself first all the time. And I understand, particularly for mothers, that is a near impossible ask, but you are no help to anyone else unless you are looking after yourself. So put yourself first. Book in things that replenish your battery. I get a monthly massage for 90 minutes. That is something that is non-negotiable in my budget.
Yeah.
Because it relaxes me, it recharges me, it makes me feel good.
Okay.
And I think stuff like that is important. So put stuff like that in place. And it doesn't have to be a monetary value thing. Even just walking to a park and sitting with your headphones in, listening to music or a podcast for an hour. Do that. You can do that. And you can tell people, I need to just step away. But put yourself first all the time.
Have you read any of Matt Hague's work?
No, but you are not the first person to ask me, and it's on my list.
Okay, yeah. I was just curious. I just finished reading 2 of his books, Reasons to Stay Alive, and then the second one, which is called Notes on a Nervous Planet. And it actually talks, I'm going to be the person who says you probably should go read some of Matt Hague, just talks about so much of what you were just sharing, and some of the stats you were just sharing, he was talking about. And he really shared his whole experience and journey with mental health and the challenges that he's had with anxiety and depression, and it just shed a completely different light on it. And really, because I mean, he's a fiction author, and a really successful fiction author. And then finally, when he began to share his story, people were like, "Yeah, me too. That's just you're not alone." And it's like, I'm so glad you shared, because now I feel like I can share, and it's really a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. I also think, and this is an important note to make, so the symptoms of what you experience, both physical and mental, around physical health and mental well-being and mental health, is actually can present wildly different depending on your environment, your situation, your biological sex is a play in it. So, and I think this is an interesting thing to kind of touch on for this section, is that even if you look at something like heart attack symptoms, right? How males present heart attack symptoms is what is commonly posted worldwide, right?
Yes.
Crushing chest pain, the left arm pain, all of that, right?
Yes.
Women don't get the same symptoms.
That's right. Yeah.
But it's not promoted. So that is because historically men have created the medical system, both psychological and physical. And so a lot of the symptoms of things that are published and put out there are based on sex, so based on males and females. And so predominantly it's a male experience. And so
interesting.
So when you're talking about your experiences and how things appear for you and things kind of display in terms of symptoms for you, you are then showing someone else in the world that their experience is actually valid, and because it may not link to what is publicly posted.
Yeah.
Which is why I talk about my experience, and it's why he's sharing his experience. And it's really important. We need more people to be doing stuff like this. And you don't have to do it on a public platform like this.
Right.
I get it that it's a crazy thing for some people to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But even just within your friendship group.
I agree. Yeah.
It's so important because there will be someone in your friendship group that has a similar experience and experiences it the same way that you do.
Mm-hmm.
It has never felt seen or heard before.
Mm-hmm.
And that can make a big difference in terms of mental well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd actually never heard the whole comparison to medical symptoms and how they present. And obviously it makes so much sense after you said it, but it's so true, because even when I was listening to Matt Hague's book, I mean, I've experienced anxiety and depression myself. So, and while there were some similarities, I was like, oh, I can understand like what he was feeling, but it showed up very differently. So what a great point. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay. So last question. What are you, not that you need anything else to work on, but what are you working on next?
Oh my God. Yeah, I definitely don't need any more to work on. But what I am focused on is really harnessing all of the stuff that we've kind of covered off on in this. So I'm speaking at a bunch of conferences end of this year, next year, which is super exciting, talking to some big companies around authenticity, personal branding, mental well-being, my story. So creating a life kind of against the odds is something that I also talk about quite a lot. Mm-hmm. So really focusing on that, focusing on my studies, making sure that I continue to get good value out of that time at uni. But then they're the main things. They're absolutely the main things. And you follow me on Instagram, Hallie, but that is where I kind of share the warts and all view of what is happening in my world. And that's where it's all at the minute.
Okay, cool. And we can all come join you on Instagram and follow along.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Come along, come say hi, and make sure. I love this. So I do this every time I do kind of like a podcast like this or any type of like conference or speaking engagement. I ask people when they follow to send me a message. So come and introduce themselves to me. That goes on LinkedIn and for Instagram, although I must say I'm much more active on Instagram. But send me a direct message and just say, hey, this is where I heard you from and this is a bit about me, and we can chat. I'm all about the community experience. I'm the type of person, I don't care about likes, comments, and follows. I couldn't care less how many of any of those I have. I care about having a community where people feel valued and loved.
Mm-hmm. And real connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Amazing. Yeah. Nick, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. I really, really appreciate it. I know we'll talk again soon, I'm sure. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for having me. This chat was a blast. I had a ball.
Thanks, Nick.